For those of you that are new to this call series, we are I4CP, the Institute for Corporate Productivity. We discover the people practices that drive high performance. We look at the revenue growth, market share, profitability, and customer satisfaction of organizations when we do our surveys and polls, really trying to tease out the human capital practices that high-performing organizations do more than low. If you're not familiar with us, we are a member-based organization. You see here just a small sample of our several hundred member organizations that have full access to all of our research, all of our events. Obviously, there are some events open to the public, like the one we're on hosting right now, but we have a great many other events, our boards, our exchanges, our flash calls, as well as our full suite of research products that are available only to members. You see here the wide range of industries and organization size, from really large organizations like Amazon and Accenture to smaller organizations, maybe the 1, 2, 3,000 employee organizations, also across all different industries from pharma to banking to government, all sectors really represented. My name is Tom Stone. I'm a senior research analyst here at I4CP, and every other week I have the pleasure of co-hosting this Getting Hybrid Work Right series with our CEO and co-founder, Kevin Oakes. Good morning, Kevin.
Good morning, Tom. And as you know, Tom, I'm also out at that board meeting for our Chief Learning and Talent Officers, and we want to publicly thank Intuit for hosting it. We haven't had an in-person meeting in a little while, so it's great that they were able to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. We had a great conversation yesterday, and we'll be having the second day of the meeting today, so I'm looking forward to that, but happy to be with all of you on this webinar on this Thursday morning first. This is part of a series. We really have these calls every Thursday. We sort of alternate between the topic of hybrid and flexible work, like we have today, with other topics, diversity, equity, and inclusion. As you see, we'll have a guest coming up from Allstate on the 22nd, next Thursday. Talent acquisition will be the topic on October 6th. Kevin, I'd like you to speak a little bit to what we have planned for the next in this series, though, coming up on the 29th.
Yeah, I just spent the day with Brenda yesterday, and she's also co-hosting our meeting today. Brenda's the Chief Learning Officer at EY and is our member chair of that Chief Talent and Learning Officer Board. And she and I are going to team up to talk about the importance of learning and why it's such a key to a healthy culture. We actually got into this discussion a little bit yesterday, talking about how do you create a culture of learning. I think a lot of organizations recognize how important that is to stay agile, particularly in these times. We've certainly seen some great examples from Microsoft and others. And so we're going to be diving into some of the things that companies can do to create that learning culture. And I think our guest today, Russell, has some good ideas around that as well.
Yes, absolutely. So again, that meeting with Brenda will be on September 29th, so in 2 weeks from today. Wanted to also remind everyone about our big once a year in-person conference, the Next Practices Now conference. This is held in March each year. This upcoming year, it'll be in late March in Scottsdale, Arizona at the lovely Fairmont there. I've been to that now several times since I've been with the organization for 5 years. Obviously, during the pandemic, we had to go completely virtual for 2 years. But this past March, we had, I think, close to 500 HR executives join us out in Arizona for a great lineup of speakers. And we've recently announced the first wave of speakers for the 2023 conference. And you see some of them listed here. Again, Kevin, if you wouldn't mind coming off mute and maybe speaking to some of the names and faces you see here, I know we're both pretty excited about this event.
Yeah, we've really got some great speakers, and this is really just a partial list of the people that we have speaking at the conference. We'll release a new slot of speakers in a couple weeks. I'm thrilled for all of these speakers to join us. We've got some long-time thought leaders like a Gary Hamel who's going to lend his expertise, Rob Cross, who's a perennial speaker at our conference, along with some new faces to our conference like Ellen McGirt. She and I had a great conversation a couple months ago that you can listen to the recording of. She's a senior editor at Fortune. We're doing a lot of work with Fortune. Thrilled to have Michelle Myers-Shipp, the CEO of Dress for Success. She comes from the HR world. She was previously the CHRO of Major League Baseball, near and dear to your heart, Tom. Greg Hoffman, who is the former CMO at Nike. So we'll get sort of the marketing aspect in play there. Anna White, who's a great friend and the chief people officer at F5. So just, I won't go through everybody. We got a lot of great folks lined up for the conference in March.
Yeah, absolutely. And registration's been open for a little while now, but we're starting to see a lot of folks register for it now that we've started announcing the speaker lineup. So excited for that. Also wanted to note, as we are a human capital research firm, that our latest major study, we do lots of pulse surveys, lots of medium-sized research projects, but we do 4 major studies a year, and our next one just opened. What's next for corporate culture? We're going to be looking specifically at toxic and healthy culture attributes in organizations. This is sort of a follow-on to the major study we did that was eventually called Culture Renovation, both the study report and then eventually the book that Kevin, you authored and had great success with. So this is a sort of a follow-on to that, sort of branding it as a further culture renovation study. This is now open as a survey, so we would absolutely love every organization represented by all of you on the call today to please take a few minutes, do that survey. Zeta just added the link in the chat, so please open that now so that it's open in your browser, and then come on back to the call and do that survey later today or tomorrow. Would really appreciate that. We want to hit the ground running with great results. It'll be open for a few weeks, but if you take care of it now, we'd appreciate getting your data included.
We worked with a number of practitioners on that survey, so I'm very excited to eventually get the results to it. I think it'll be a great follow-up to culture renovation.
And as a little teaser on that topic, and then we're going to introduce our guest and get into the conversation today, had a quick poll question. We asked this last week as well. Quick question on culture. Has your organization's culture changed since the onset of the pandemic? Yes, it's become much better, improved somewhat. No big change. Or yes, but it's gotten worse in some way, either somewhat or to a large degree. So take a moment and reflect on that and answer that poll question.
And fair warning to Russell, we're going to want to hear your feedback to this question live.
Give everyone just another couple seconds. We've still got folks that are joining the webinar, which is always the case with events these days. People have back-to-back meetings, back-to-back events to attend to, so we always recognize that. Welcome everyone who's maybe joining a little late. So as we've seen with some previous snap polls like this, the majority of people have had a change in culture. The most popular response, as we've seen before, is that yes, and it's improved somewhat. Not many saying that it's improved to a great degree. Some people, though, some organizations, yes, but it's deteriorated somewhat. We see it 1 out of 4 of you saying that. So that's in line with what we've seen in previous weeks. At this point, I'm going to turn things over to you, Kevin, to introduce our special guest, Russell.
All right, thanks, Tom. Russell, we're so happy to have you here with us today. Russell Robinson's the Senior Training and Engagement Advisor for the Program Support Center at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Maybe the longest title I've had to read so far this year, Russell. We're looking forward to this conversation, and I think probably the best place to start, Russell, is just tell our audience about the Program Support Center. I bet a lot of people don't know what that is within the department, and then your role within the department itself.
Thanks, Tom and Kevin, man. Excited to be here. Shout out to I4CP for wanting a government perspective and considering me a thought leader. I've been on the past couple of these and learned a lot. So shout out to both of you and Zeta, the DJ in the background on the 1s and 2s. Like we have a musical connection now. So I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to be here on behalf of the Program Support Center. The name is a little long, and understanding that this is not a government forum, I'm going to do my best to not like overload you all with acronyms as if you all know what they mean. Program Support Center is a shared service provider within the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. And in essence, we provide we act as a vendor to other government agencies in regards to things like financial management, grants, accounting, real estate, badging, logistics, occupational health. I've been with the Program Support Center for 7 years, 21 years as a civil servant, proud civil servant. Within this role, I am the senior advisor for training and engagement. So I put together the enterprise-wide training plans for our 450-ish employees. I'm also the employee engagement guy. I have a doctorate from George Washington University in human organizational learning, and my research was focused on the relationship between employee voice and employee silence as it relates to engagement with federal employees. And also I've done some research on civil servants. In addition to that, I'm an adjunct professor at American University where I teach grad level leadership classes to feds. I have an LLC where I do research, podcast, speaking, but it's Thursday night. So the most important job I have is Thursday night is grandpa night in my house. And I have my grandkids over. And in that role, I am a TikTok video dancer, a chef, a PlayStation 5 referee, and grandpa, can I stay up past halftime to watch Thursday night football judge? So that's the most important role. And that'll kick off about 5 o'clock this evening.
Well, you've got a lot of responsibilities there, Russell, but I would say you look much too young to be a grandpa. So kudos to you.
Well, I thought so at the time, but I am old enough, you know.
Well, just in spite of all those responsibilities that you've got, let's focus on the department. I'd love to just hear over the past, 2.5 years since the pandemic, how have things changed? You saw the poll we just did, and I said, you'd be on the hook to answer that as well.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear how the culture has changed, but also how learning has changed since the beginning of the pandemic to now.
So self-disclosure for the survey at the beginning, I said it's deteriorated somewhat. So in the government, we use the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey, FEVS. So you've got the acronym, you've got the long name, which is administered by the Office of Personnel Management across the government. For the last surveying we did, I think anybody can make any assumption based on what the data said. But I do pulse surveys, town halls. I mean, I'm a pulse survey king. Pulse survey, town halls. We have 450 employees. I know every supervisor. I know who my water cooler champions are pre-COVID. So what I would say is engagement and productivity have gone up just a bit at the sacrifice of wellness and well-being. So how do we balance those two things? How that has impacted training? Well, we've gone virtual. I'm in Bethesda, Maryland right now. As you all know, the DC, Maryland, Virginia area is a heavy hub for government work. On one hand, going virtual has leveled the playing field because Kevin, you're on the West Coast. So by going virtual, we listen to our West Coast employees and they don't have to get up at 5 a.m. and 6 a.m. for trainings anymore. So we don't start any training before 10 a.m. if it's all day. If it's a 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hour, we tend to start it in the afternoon. So it levels the playing field. We have, I think one of the biggest things we've seen from an engagement standpoint, culture standpoint, pre-COVID, post-COVID, is the lack of capacity our employees have, especially our supervisors. So we've really worked to move to shorter trainings, on-demand training, so that they can get it when they want it. We try to put it out there for them. And that just came to listening to managers and supervisors. I remember when we had the most awesome change management training and someone was like, Russ, this is the best training you've ever offered. All I'm thinking about is the 300 emails that I missed today that I've got waiting for me. So we try to get to a point where we're making the training available and out there in shorter, more bite-sized formats and allowing people to go get it.
So tell us a little bit more about that training. What types of content are you putting out there? And I'd love to hear about the delivery methodology, tools that you're using.
Yeah.
You know, what's been working for you?
So we're small. So in the areas of engagement, voice culture, a little bit of some of the work we do for diversity and inclusion. I do that because I'm the expert. I'm the best. Other stuff where I'm not the best, I use vendors because they have the capacity to do that. I use right now. I tend to work with mostly women-owned, small and minority businesses, and then we do things where we do virtual trainings now, but we also either record it or we work with the vendors to give us on-demand products like podcasts. So like, for example, we did something for our, I'm not going to throw it to government acronym in, our lower level staff, like leading from your level. And it was spaced out over 4 months. And what we found was they were so overwhelmed, they weren't focusing on part 2 until like the day before. So we worked with the vendor to say, hey, can you give us like a little 5-10 minute podcast that I can put out a week after the training? Let's recap over what we went through in part 1. Let's preview what we're going to do in part 2. And again, the goal is to get as much on demand. Obviously, with the pandemic, I believe there was some research from one of your competitors that said pre-COVID, remote workers were 50% less likely to get promotions. So what we've incorporated is we've done virtual learning for leaders, but also virtual learning for followers to set everybody up to succeed. We do heavy training along the lines of our values, which are accountability, efficiency, customer service, and transparency. I like what you, Kevin, like what you said about Brenda earlier, because where I am right now is so heavy on what do we have to do to become a learning culture, like really, really, really targeting the first level supervisors, because at the end of the day, those are the people where we found they'll make or break what we're trying to accomplish from a training and a culture standpoint. And the last thing I'll say is, especially I learned this teaching middle managers and seniors executives. These folks are ridiculously overwhelmed, and we're not focusing on them as individuals overwhelmed, and we're also not focusing on like, okay, how do you lead your team? So when Tom and I were doing a pre-call, I was like, look, I hope this isn't a thing where it's like Russ is going to give me a quick playbook to make everything better, because that's kind of not where we are, you know?
Yeah, no, I hear you. You know, your comment earlier about remote workers and promotions and you know, just getting recognized. We're a little concerned as organizations move back to the office that we're going to see proximity bias kind of creep in again here, right? Where if somebody's right in front of us, you know, we're going to be much more inclined to give that individual, you know, more responsibility, et cetera, versus remote workers. And I guess in that light, Russell, I'd just be curious to hear what are your plans going forward for return to office? And then how do you think learning has changed over time? Do you think it's more effective now or less effective than it was before?
So we have returned to office. So government-wide, our return is some form of hybrid. So within PSC is some form of hybrid. And truth be told, I know the title of this is how HHS is getting hybrid work right. I don't really know that we are. You know, I think where we are, I think we're in when I say we, I mean everybody. I think we're in phase 4 of maybe 15. And we just experienced something once in a century. You know, I really don't know, you know, what we've gotten right. What I do know is I love data and I love talking to people. So we had supervisors and leaders and workers who worked remotely before COVID. So I lean into them. Okay, what are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? I have a friend who doesn't work for the government. She's an expat, Howard University grad, lives in Amsterdam. And she's like, Russ, I got staff on 6 continents. Our monthly meeting is the 2 a.m. meeting because we rotated. Somebody will do the meeting at 2 a.m. And then that person gets time off. So it's really like exploring where the people who are doing it right. And the people who've been doing remote for a while have definitely been doing it right. And then it's really about listening to people. So like where we brought people back, I think we're Health and Human Services. So, we're on the front line for COVID and vaccine and everything. And then within the program support center, like everything you need to get done on the back end, like acquisitions, we take care of it. I think we really focused on safety, from a Maslow standpoint, and it made perfect sense. When you come back, we want to make sure you don't get COVID. We want to make sure that you're spaced out. We want to make sure that masks are available. We want to make sure that we're following whatever the state and local governments are saying. I don't think we really focused on like how we maintain relationships in this. So if you asked me a year ago, I come in on Monday and Tuesday or Thursday, if I'm speaking, and I'd have been great. But the past 4 months, it's like I come in and spend all day on Zoom. We didn't sit down and say, what are we going to do to make the in-office experience something that's worthwhile, that is this social lubricant, that makes people feel whole and feel connected. And I think that's kind of where the struggle is, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I just want to give you some kudos, Russell, in the chat. A lot of people are really appreciating your authenticity and frankness in your responses here today. So definitely appreciate that. Also just wanted to draw attention from the chat. I had mentioned, and then thank you, Zeta, for providing the link. On that topic of proximity bias, we do have a tool, a checklist for our members. So any members on the call, make sure you download that if that's a topic of concern for you.
Yeah, and I think, Russell, the that comment around connection is so important. We've seen too many organizations just require people to come back into the office, and they're doing what you just said. They're sitting on Zoom calls while in the office and thinking about how much more productive they could have been if they didn't have that commute, back and forth. And so it really is about creating the right moments to come back in person and connect together, being intentional about that. I think a lot of organizations are starting to come around to that right now.
Yeah, but then it really gets to, do you have the right people? So look, I got 3 kids, 30, 28, and 22. My 22-year-old works for an NFL team. So he's there every day. If he worked remotely from his office from a connection standpoint, I'd really be worried about him. My older son works in Dallas. He's a remote employee for a company in Chicago. He's a Baltimore Ravens fan, so he knows where the bar is for that. He's an Arsenal soccer fan. He knows where the bar is for that. He and his girlfriend have got their thing going. I think he's pretty good. My daughter's 30. She creates tribes wherever she goes. But she's a single mother, so she needs that work-life flexibility. My wife started a job during COVID, and she misses that connection. How I interact with them are different. If this was my staff, then we need supervisors and leaders who can take whatever your hybrid work policy is and understand how you connect at a different level. Bureau of Labor Statistics just came out with this report, I think a couple weeks ago, that basically said the Great Resignation is impacting Black women at a larger level because they were finding the office wasn't equitable in the first place. So what I wanted, like from a perspective standpoint, so I'm a voice researcher. How do we get as many perspectives in? If your return to work doesn't factor that in, then that's going to impact your talent management. That's going to impact your training. That's going to impact everything you do. I was on the session 2 weeks ago where we talked about how Wall Street is trying to force everybody back. That's why we're in phase 4. But some of it's from a real estate standpoint. And here's the thing. I think they should be part of the conversation. I don't know what the answer is, but they should be part of the conversation. Technology should be a part of it. Process should be a part of it. But at the end of the day, this is basically change management. As we return to work, do we have leaders and supervisors who know how to be strategic, agile, and have the emotional intelligence to empower employees and customers? And if we don't, do we need to train them, or do we need to make talent management decisions? And the last thing I'll say is my biggest fear is people think you can train this away. Like, some of it really gets to, this changes how you hire. This changes how you select, because the command and control is a necessary tool in your toolkit. It's not something you can lead by every day. And people want to feel like they are connected at a basic level, that they feel like they belong and they are valued.
Yeah, you're making a great point about needing to have the right people in the organization. I think Wade sums things up nicely in the chat too, in terms of return to office, that you need to have that intentionality and the business rationale, as he says, because I said so is not a good business reason. Those, some of you may have seen the article that Kevin, you wrote. I forget the exact title, but it was something along the lines of the CEO is not the most qualified person to drive the return to office decision making. You really need to listen, as it sounds like you are, Russell, to your employees, and find out, from the folks on the ground up through middle management, what are their real challenges, and where does it make sense to return to the office, how often, for what reasons, etc.
Yeah, Tom, so I think the big thing I see is there's this, everybody wants to work remotely. But when you look at the data, I mean, there's so much burnout and disconnection. And let's be clear, like, domestic abuse is up, spousal abuse is up, suicide is up. I think people want to have autonomy, but I think there's a standpoint of like, what do we do to foster that relationship and connection? And I just think it's this is such a different game. Mm-hmm. And then at a larger level, what's the role of work? If does work become transactional? Does the role of culture change? Like, there's so many questions, like there's so many variables that need to be factored into whatever decision you make. And then based on the decision, you got to look at what the change management aspect is. I have a friend, Matt Gosney, who's in charge of talent at the University of Colorado Health System. And his return to work was simple. He looked at his staff and said, you can work at home from in your pajamas and be fantastic. Not disputing that. And this was during COVID, when it was at its height. We have doctors, nurses, and techs who are putting their lives on the line every day. They come home and they can't interact with their family. Like, they're passing clothes off in the garage to someone who can watch it. Is it fair that they are putting their lives on the line every day, and we're letting you work from home in pajamas? No. So you're going to have to come in. And if because of that you feel you need to, this may not be the job for you, that's understandable. So then it gets, from a strategic standpoint, whatever decision you got with hybrid work, what's your succession plan? Because from a change management standpoint, it's going to work for a group of your employees. Some are going to be like, I could really care less. And some are going to be like, I can't stay. I'm going to move on and do other stuff.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier too, needing to, just how different this is, and needing to learn from the organizations that have the most experience doing this. On a lot of these calls, I like to mention a couple of them. One is a very small company called GitLab. They've long had a resource for remote work that's freely available. They did that well before the pandemic, and obviously I'm sure it got a lot more downloads in the past 2.5 years. So recommend that. They're only about, I think, 1,500 employees, but they've been fully remote for over a decade. On the other end of the spectrum, our friends at Microsoft have put together a lot of great resources. They have hybrid work guides, again, openly available. So if you're a much larger company, or you're that sort of a tech company, even if you're not, I think there's a lot to learn from organizations that are different from you. Russell, you being in the government, very different than a company like Microsoft in terms of maybe the resources you have available and budgets and things like that. But a lot of the learnings from companies like Microsoft, I think, are helpful across the board. So in addition to all the resources that I4CP provides, of course, both open to the public, and which we've done a lot of during the past 2.5 years, and also those resources that are for members only, I'd encourage GitLab and Microsoft as two others to look at.
So while we're shamelessly saying what we use, again, as a voice researcher, I'm trying to find every way to get to employees, and I'm a big advocate of pulse surveys. So I use Waggle, and we use them for everything. It started as engagement, but we use it for training. We use it for our diversity and inclusion survey. I got a wellness survey getting ready to go out, and do it repeatedly, because I think everybody will tell you, like, the annual climate survey is like the best DVD player in the streaming world, and especially with where we've been the past 2.5 years with COVID, with social justice, being a civil servant, understanding the role partisan politics plays in anything. And, if you're citing data that's, we're in September now. If you're citing data from December, it's pretty much outdated at this point. So you've got to, again, we're in phase 4 of maybe 15. So you've got to have constant touch points. And what I like about the pulse surveys is they're quick, they're easy, you get results in real time. And the last thing, one thing I would say is to those who are new to pulse surveys, the survey is a tool. It's 1/3. The other third is sharing the data and then sharing the action plan. Because tools are nice, but they don't solve the problem by themselves.
And Russell, how often are you sending out those pulse surveys?
Yeah, so the engagement survey we just finished doing, OPM just finished administering the 22 survey. So the results will probably come out in November. And right after those results come out, we use that as our start of the conversation. So we'll do a 7-question pulse survey based on that. And we'll do that a couple times a year. But that's strictly for engagement. Whenever our leadership does town halls, we pulse survey on the back of that. We started doing it for customer experience. And because I like throwing data out, there was a report that came out that said that, interestingly, during COVID, people felt government employees provided better customer service than they had the previous year for 2020. So customer experience training, I use it for, right now, I'm building my training plan for fiscal year 23. The government calendar fiscal year is October to September. But I do focus groups with leaders and supervisors, and then we send a pulse survey, an IDP pulse survey to employees. And then we build that. Diversity, we've really started sending more wellness, burnout, well-being surveys, because we really got to get, I think that's what's keeping me up at night, is especially with fall and winter coming up, because that's the heavy depression time normally.
Yeah, and we obviously do a lot of surveys, but I think it sounds like you've got a good handle on survey fatigue and making sure you're keeping an eye on that, but also giving back the action plans to people based on those surveys. We had one question, been a lot of comments, by the way, and people are commending you for dropping pearls of wisdom. So thank you for dropping those pearls of wisdom, Russell. But been a lot of comments just on how you're managing your group. And one of them was around the action plans, and just, if you can't take an action plan, should you put out a pulse survey? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Personally, I wouldn't. I think people are not over surveyed; they're under action. And I know there's some HHS people up here, so I'll say, as we do these pulse surveys, I hear from different parts of HHS, "Hey, I hear you're doing pulse surveys. Would you help us out?" And I'm like, "Yes." I have one criteria. Are you going to share the data no matter what it says? Well, I may need to see what the data says. Hey, then this isn't the tool for you. Maybe start building that succession plan, because they're going to leave. But seriously, especially with where we are right now, It's very for trust. There's no shame in saying you don't know. It's, we did a well-being webinar for our supervisors where I talked about burnout and depression and suicide. And the one thing I said in the action plan for supervisors is, you don't have to know the answer. Like you have to know how to ask the right questions. You have to know how to tell people what does support look like. But when it comes to pulse surveys, if you're just honest with people, and if I look government wide, if you look at, put on my engagement hat, Gallup came out with a report that engagement scores went down for the first time in 10 years. Government-wide engagement scores went down. Unhappiness is up. Trust in government is down. Turnover is high. I think scores are going to continue to go down because of the space we're in. Let's normalize that. Let's have that conversation. Let's find out why things are going like that. But to get back to your question, I'm not going to put out a survey that we're not going to share, or that we're not going to have an action plan, because that gets to credibility. And, I tell people, like, from American Gangsters, like the scene when Denzel's with Cuba Gooding and he's like, Pepsi, that's a brand name, like the pulse survey is the brand. If you get a pulse survey, that's coming from Dr. Russ, we're going to share the results. We know you're going to give us we're going to give you an action plan. And if you're not going to do that, then we won't even venture down that road.
You just mentioned doing a webinar for supervisors on burnout. Kathy just asked in the chat, what do you think some of the best ways to address support burnout is in the workplace? So besides what you already shared, for both supervisors, managers, and for individual contributors, regular employees, what sort of things have you been doing to focus on burnout?
So it's interesting. Trying to think who it is. I think Russell Hill came out with a report specific to feds earlier this week that said 1/3 of feds did not take vacations last year. And one of the reasons was money. The other one was the workload. So it really gets to, how do you minimize your workload? If you're a manager or a supervisor, what can you delegate? Are you working as efficiently as you could? When I teach, I talk about the power of rituals. Okay, let's get up in the morning. What can we do to maintain our mental, physical, and spiritual health and wellness? If you finish a meeting early, you don't have to answer emails. You get up and walk around. We have a supervisor who's a type 2 diabetic, and he said he found during the day his scores would go up because he was just in his basement working. And if he was in the office, he'd be up walking around, visiting people. So how do you build that in? We've heavily recommended 50-minute meetings that start at 5 after hour, start 5 before the hour. Sometimes if I have a 15-minute break, I pull up the Peloton app and do a 5 or 10-minute workout. And I keep some dumbbells in my office, just so I can knock out something. So you can find ways to build these barriers in early in COVID. And I think the lady who spoke a couple of weeks ago talked about this. We talked to supervisors about, okay, we've got workers who are homeschooling now. They're taking care of people in a vulnerable population. Don't schedule meeting after meeting after meeting. Spread it out. And we let employees know, if you want to have autonomy over your day, great. What we found was people were working too late into the night. So then we had supervisors send out the anthem at 6 p.m. This is the last email for the night. Everybody shut your computer off. But it really gets to, like, for me, I've talked to people about what is your routine to maintain your wellness? What is your routine to maintain your sanity? What are you doing to not be overwhelmed? And the cool thing about the past few years is there's so much available online from ability to work out, whether it's Calm or different apps where you can do your meditation. So it really gets with that. But then also from a work standpoint, I think the biggest thing is, what can you delegate? Do you have role clarity? Are you being clear? Why does it take you as the manager 8 levels of review to get something done? Something's wrong there. How can we get it down to 1 or 2? And I think doing that and then having a leadership that champions that and embodies that also helps.
We've pulled up this slide, and thanks, Tom, for pulling it up on our holistic well-being study that we did recently. And this is a great study for I4CP members. Certainly download this. We did a new pulse survey on the financial aspect of this recently as well, which I thought was pretty interesting. But the mental and emotional health is the one that's obviously garnered the most attention, Russell, over the last couple of years for sure. And it wasn't that long ago where managers were actually coached to stay away from that topic, right, with their employees. There were, that was sort of a taboo topic for you to go down the road with. And I'm just wondering how you're changing the training with managers these days. How are you helping them have that conversation with their reports?
Right. So it's the ability to have difficult conversations. And I looked at this report, and I can't, to be honest with you, I can't say there's one of the 6 that's more important. Like all 6 are critical. I think for changing the conversation, I'll be honest, after George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery, I was impacted like I really hadn't been before. And I'm the engagement guy here at Program Support Center. I'm supposed to be on. And I wasn't on. And I talked to some of I got my undergrad degree at the University of Dayton, Ohio. So one of the blessings of COVID is some of the Black guys I went to college with, we reconnected 30 years later for Zooms, and we still talk, and we all experienced the same thing. And then, so we did a podcast with our Black leaders. And after the massage parlor killings in Atlanta, we did a podcast on race and identity with our Asian employees. And one of the employees said, I was raised that in the workplace, you never talk about race, religion, and politics. As a voice researcher, pre all of this, I was probably like, what can we do so that you bring your thoughts, ideas, concerns for the betterment of the organization to the table? But now I'm about, what can we do to help you with how you present yourself every day? And we've worked with, through that, we set up a voluntary employee resource group. My shop paid for the funding, where we work with leaders and employees to really have these difficult conversations. So while it started with diversity, toward the end of COVID, when HHS and the government was asking employees not to be vaccinated, but to disclose your vaccine status, we had strengthened a muscle in difficult conversations where employees could have these conversations. Being a Fed, the Roe v. Wade decision, I had a couple supervisors come to me and I said, well, look, it's not your job to have an opinion. It's your job to create a culture with people with differing opinions can speak. When we did our pods, I told staff, look, I'm Black Lives Matter. No shame in that. I know there are staff that are all lives matter. I want to give you a forum so that you can share your point of view. We don't have to agree. I need to know your perspective. You need to know mine. And I had a guy, and we had a great conversation. And he and I agreed. He wanted to do it. I don't think he would have liked how he would have been perceived. And we decided not to. But it's really about, how do you create that form where you can get those different perspectives. And that goes back to the emotional intelligence, like the 9-word sentence: strategic, agile, emotionally intelligent leaders empower employees and customers. Every training I do touches on that. But emotional intelligence is connecting. It's understanding different perspectives. It's self-regulation. It's creating an environment where we can learn from each other. So that's the work we're doing with supervisors. That's the work we're doing with well-being. I think of the 6 you have on the screen in January, I really, especially with where the economy's going, and we've got some Gen Zs and millennials who've never seen an economic downturn. So I'm really training. I'm looking at doing next fiscal year is really on bullet 3 toward financial well-being. But we're going to touch on all of the stuff you have here.
Yeah, our head of research, Kevin Martin, just shared in the chat one of the results from the most recent shorter survey that we did that Kevin, you mentioned, was on financial well-being. And one of the findings was just how connected financial well-being is to mental and emotional health. So thanks, Kevin Martin, for sharing that in the chat. And I think that's only that connection, that correlation is only going to become stronger, as you're saying, Russell, in the coming weeks and months, given the way the economy is looking and going into the winter, particularly when there's other factors, as you said earlier on the call, fall and winter being a time that depression usually peaks, lack of sunshine and other reasons. So a lot of factors are probably going to come together there. So
in the federal space, I think government-wide, the focus has always been, let's talk about finances when you're like on the bell lap. You're 2 or 3 years from retirement. But now the shift is more on like your financial wellness throughout your government term. And look, things are changing. I mentioned my son, 22 years old. When he started working, the first thing I said to him was like, look, this isn't your grandmother. Like, my mother was a principal with DC Public Schools. And when she got hired as a teacher, she knew she was going to retire from DC Public Schools. I got 21 years in the government. So, I'm past the point of no return. But I said, look, this is your first job. You're going to get a new job in a couple of years. While it also has financial wellness, it also gets to, like, I go back to talent management. How do you create that culture where employees can come and go? And you built your brand where they're strong. Or like, for example, Amazon's just moved into DC. I would love for our supply chain division to create an internship where our people can go intern at Amazon, and Amazon people can come here and they can cycle back in. And then you tie the financial aspect to all of it as well. So, and Zeta's waving. So she knows when I get flowing like this, I'm like the Grammys, and Stevie Wonder, the Grammys, and you have to play music to get me to shut up. So
no, I love that you just mentioned Amazon. Amazon's pretty well known for having those kind of partnerships and programs that go well beyond just training their own employees for internal movement within Amazon. So I would encourage organizations to look to partner with the Amazons, the Walmarts, the McDonald's of the world that are well known for doing that kind of. They have companies like that have a much broader lens on training and development.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that. Yeah, they have done a good job at cycling people through, and I know we have a couple of case studies out there that shows that sort of cross-company, cross-organization mobility, which I think is pretty interesting. So Russell, you've mentioned how important the manager is in this whole conversation. Is there anything different that you're doing today than that you weren't doing a couple of years ago from a training perspective with those leaders inside your organization?
So what we're doing differently is for the 9-word sentence. Probably 4 years ago, we focused on employees first. And what we found was we were doing great stuff for employees, but managers and supervisors didn't have the time, or to be honest with you, didn't care. For all the engagement voice stuff, the biggest hindrance is leaders that don't care. So what we are doing different is we're having multiple touch points with them. I think the biggest thing I'm doing for FY23, we did a strengths development assessment for all of our leaders vertically, and it went really well. We gave them coaching, but what we found, what we're doing going forward, is now we're reaching out to individual supervisors, skip level supervisors, and say, let's do this assessment with you and your team vertically. And that way you learn from each other, you learn about each other, you're learning in this context. So a lot of leadership training, a lot of times leaders learn by themselves, or they learn with other leaders and their teams aren't there. And I think from a culture and collaboration and a connection standpoint, like if I'm looking at Tom, Kevin, and Zeta. So for this scenario, Zeta's the supervisor. If she knows, here's what Russell's strengths are, here's what Kevin's strengths are, here's what Tom's strengths are, here's what it's like when they overdo those strengths. And then here's how Russell likes to receive information. Russell likes the rosy picture. Kevin just wants 2 sentences. Then that's how you help to build that connection. So the 9-word sentence is strategic, agile, emotionally intelligent leaders empower employees and customers. And everything we do from a training standpoint hits that sentence.
I don't know who can do this, but we've had a request to please write out the 9-word sentence. So I don't know if Zeta, you wrote those down or not. Maybe Russell, you could say it one more time and we'll make sure that we get it written out.
I'll type it, no problem.
Okay, all right. As you're typing, Russell, I talked earlier about the importance of a learning culture and prefacing that webinar that we've got coming up. And I feel like today it's more important than ever to stay agile. And if you can get the whole concept of we as smarter than me going inside your organization and really leverage the knowledge of the workforce, you're going to be a much more agile organization. And I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that. How have you created a culture of learning inside the organization?
Yeah, so to be honest with you, it's not how we're creating, it's how we're trying to create it. And I think the buzzwords for me are, I like to ask people, hey, during the past 30 plus months of craziness, how do you learn? What have you read? What podcast? I'm a podcast guy. What podcasts, what experience with your employees has made you change how you lead or made you reflect on your theory? If you can't answer that question, I'm a little worried about it. I'm in the government. So when I was in earlier agencies, I'm on the civilian side. So when we would get DOD leaders who we're doing this because this is how I did it in the Army. Well, this isn't the Army. And that was a while ago. So I think the goal is to really get leaders who want to learn. And for me, it's like, well, then I'm going to put it out there however you want it. Like I said earlier, I got people where, I'm a podcast junkie. So I'll just send podcasts out to staff and leaders. It really gets to, I got a friend, Steve Pemberton with WorkHuman, who told me your average Fortune 100 CEO reads 50 books a year. So the year he told me that, I read 38 books. So, and then that gets into like how do we incorporate this into the interview process where we find out whether these are learning people? Because the fact of the matter is, the class, I teach a self-reflection class at American University, which is really based on what worked over there may not work over here, but it really gets to the point where you're saying, I want to acquire the type of knowledge that is making me reflect on, do my beliefs change? So like for me, I hold my values tightly: trust, confidence, and authenticity. I hold those values tightly. My beliefs, not so much. My beliefs are based on data. So that could change over time. Or if you come at me with better data, I'm willing to reflect on that. And I think when you have those type of leaders, you create an empowered culture where employees can be on the front line and know stuff leaders don't know, but they know that leaders open to learning and open to flexibility. You can listen to customers and they know they can be heard, as opposed to an exercise. And I just think at the end of the day, like for where the prism, I see where I am right now. They say with employee engagement, the mistake I see with employee engagement, it's always about, well, we need to do X with the employees, Y with employees. But all employee engagement is really about is here's the culture you need to make employees feel valued, available, confident. You have to have learning leaders to do that. And if you don't have learning leaders after the past 30 plus months, and you haven't factored that into your talent management plan and every aspect of your business, again, you better have strong succession planning because you're going to have some turnover.
We had one more question I think we have time for that Cecilia put in the chat here about just measuring the effectiveness. Russell, are you doing anything around the measurement side?
Yeah, so we look at cost per training. Again, I do a waggle survey that gives me net promoter, few other, did the trainer know what's going on? And then the open-ended is normally one good, bad aspect. Where would you like to do a deeper dive? And then that works. To be honest with you, the next step is kind of like that Kirkpatrick model, where we go to our supervisors and say, okay, Russell took this awesome training. How are you taking what he's learned and it impacts the type of work he does? And to be honest with you, we're not there yet. It's a journey. So that's where I'd like to go.
Well, I want to make sure we plug your podcast though, Russell, before we depart here. So if people want to, listen to your podcast, how do they do that?
So it's the Amplified Research Speaker Box podcast, Amplified Research. I got some awesome guests. I'm getting ready to start taping season 6. This time Saturday, I will be in St. Martin. So I'm going to tape a podcast a day in the sunshine. And we've had different topics, heavy COVID. We do some D&I, we do some engagement. I get my guy, Tony Mitchell, my waggle guy. He's my guru on how all this works. I got one with him. But for season 6, we're really going to explore the learning leader. So you can find me on Spotify, Apple, Google, on the cruise ships, Dollar General, 7-Eleven, just
or in St. Martin.
Yeah, you can find me in St. Martin if you're in St. Martin.
That's great that you're gonna have some time in St. Martin. I've been there. It's a beautiful location. So
it's where I go to escape, man. So my wife lets me go to escape. She and her girls just landed in Ghana, so she was gone, and I was like, hey, I can go to. But again, it goes back to like, I think people have to get away, unwind, and not constantly work, because that gets back to the burnout and wellness.
Yeah.
Well, Super Sleuth Zeta found your podcast link out on Spotify, so she's put that in the chat. But as you said, you can find it pretty much anywhere you find podcasts. Russell, I want to thank you for being such a great guest today. Outstanding conversation, as people were giving you kudos throughout the call for your authenticity and dropping all those pearls of wisdom, as Kevin noted. Great conversation.
Yeah, thanks again, Russell. This has been fantastic. I wish we could talk to you for another hour. But you're welcome back anytime, and really appreciate you joining us today.
Thanks to both of you, Zeta and I4CP, for allowing, consider me a thought leader, but allowing like a civil servant to come in and speak about this, where we are from the public sector perspective. So kudos and much respect to I4CP.
Yeah, definitely great to get that perspective added in with all the private sector companies that we normally have. Just a reminder for everyone, September 29th, that'll be 2 weeks from today, will be our next Getting Hybrid Work Right. It'll be a special edition where Kevin himself will be joined by Brenda Sugru, Chief Learning Officer from EY. So we look forward to that one 2 weeks from today at the same time. So thanks, everyone. Great conversation in the chat. Thanks again, Russell. Outstanding conversation. And look forward to seeing folks on a future I4CP call.
Thanks again, Russell. Take care.
Thanks, guys.